Hello students, welcome to the lecture on pricing practices and strategies. And after this lecture, we will be able to learn the following objectives. Understand the various forms of market, define price discrimination, explain the determination of market price, discuss the transfer price, describe price war. Let's start with the concept of pricing practices and strategies. Pricing theory under the profit maximization hypothesis suggests that given the revenue and cost curves, price and output are so determined that profit is maximized. Some empiricists have, however, produced the evidence inadequate though that firms follow a pricing rule other than the one suggested by the marginality rule. Besides, in a complex business world, business firms follow a variety of pricing rules and methods depending on the conditions faced by them. Price is a unique category of the marketing mix as it is the only component that represents revenue for the firm. The remaining piece, product, place and promotion are costly activities undertaken to create value for the consumer. Price in its ideal form recaptures this value. Yet, most companies adopt very simple heuristics or rules of thumb for setting prices, often divorced from firm strategy and economic reality. Let us now discuss the various forms of market. Markets are traditionally classified into four basic types. These are perfect competition is characterized by a large number of buyers and sellers of an essential identical product. Each member of the market where the buyer or seller is so small in relation to the total industry volume that is unable to influence the price of the product. Individual buyers and sellers are essentially price takers. Perfect competition. Competitive markets operate on the basis of a number of assumptions. When these assumptions are dropped, we move into the world of imperfect competition. These assumptions are assumptions. Many suppliers, each with an insignificant share of the market. This means that each firm is too small relative to the overall market to affect price via a change in its own supply. Each individual firm is assumed to be a price taker. An identical output produced by each firm, in other words, the market supplies homogeneous or standardized products that are perfect substitutes for each other. Consumers perceive the products to be identical. Effects of a change in market demand. The firm's average revenue curve shifts up to AR2 is equal to MR2 and the profit maximizing output expands to Q2. Notice that MC curve is the firm's supply curve. Higher prices cause an expansion along the supply curve. Following the increase in demand, total profits have increased. An inward shift in market demand would have the opposite effect. Many sellers. In this market, there are many sellers who form total of market supply. Individually, seller is a firm and collectively it is an industry. In perfect competition, price of commodity is decided by market forces of demand and supply, that is by buyers and sellers collectively. Many buyers. Individual buyer cannot control the price by changing or controlling the demand. Because individual buyers, individual demand is a very small part of total demand or market demand. Perfect knowledge. On the front of both buyers and sellers, perfect knowledge regarding market and pricing conditions is expected. So, no buyer will pay price higher than market price and no seller will charge a lower price than market price. Perfect mobility of factors. This feature is essential to keep supply at par with demand. If all factors are easily movable from one line of production to another, then it becomes easy to adjust supply as per demand. Characteristics of perfect competition. The four key characteristics of perfect competition are a large number of small firms, identical products sold by all firms, perfect resource mobility or the freedom of entry into and exit out of the industry, and perfect knowledge of prices and technology. Large number of small buyers. A perfectly competitive market or industry contains a large number of small firms, each of which is relatively small compared to the overall size of the market. This ensures that no single firm can exert market control over price or quantity. If one firm decides to double its output or stop producing entirely, the market is unaffected. Identical goods. Each firm in a perfectly competitive market sells an identical product, which is also commonly termed homogeneous goods. The essential feature of this characteristic is not so much that the goods themselves are exactly perfectly the same, but that buyers are unable to discern any difference. In particular, buyers cannot tell which firm produces a given product. There are no brand names or distinguishing features that differentiate products by firm. Monopolistic competition. Monopolistic competition market is a form of market in which there are a large number of buyers and sellers of differentiated commodities. Under monopolistic competition, commodities of different sellers are close substitutes of one another but not identical. That is, the commodity of one seller is slightly different from the commodity of other sellers.
What do you remember about perfect competition? I mean, how would you recognize a perfectly competitive industry if you ran across one? In perfect competition, 1, there are a large number of sellers. There are a large number of buyers too, but we won't be worrying about that just now. No individual is large enough to affect the market. 2, the product is homogeneous or identical or non-differentiated. For example, milk. When you go to buy 2% milk at the supermarket, what brand do you buy? If you're like me, you buy whatever's on sale. I have no brand loyalty whatsoever because milk is milk. 3, there's perfect information. It's actually not enough for products to be identical. Everyone has to know that the products are identical. Otherwise, we could be fooled by things like pretty packaging or celebrity endorsements. In a perfectly competitive industry, firm versus firm advertising is useless. All you'd be doing is driving up your own costs, and then customers would just buy from a cheaper competitor. However, you may see industry-wide advertising like the Got Milk campaign, pork, the other white meat, or beef, it's what's for dinner. These kind of campaigns raise demand for each firm's product across the industry. 4, easy entry and exit. Because firms can enter and exit the industry at will, long-term profits will be effective, but we'll get to that in just a bit. For the individual firm owner, the combined effect of these characteristics is that he or she has no power to control price and will earn zero economic profit in the long run. Let me ask you this. If the individual firm cannot set the price, then where does the price come from? Think back to our market activity earlier in the semester. In a market with lots of buyers and sellers, the price is determined collectively by the market supply and market demand. This, then, is the prevailing price for each firm. What happens if the firm doesn't like this price? If it tries to charge more than P star, all of the customers will go someplace else, so the firm would be forced back down to P star. If it tries to charge less than P star, then all customers in the industry will come to this firm. Sounds good, right? Wrong. This firm cannot accommodate the entire industry demand. Costs would skyrocket. The firm would be forced back up to P star to get rid of some of the customers. All of this means that the firm is a price taker, forced to accept P star, the market-determined equilibrium price. Note that this also means, because the firm charges P star regardless of the quantity demanded, that P star represents the firm's demand as well. Remember that perfectly elastic demand curve from earlier this semester, where consumers are so hypersensitive to price that price is all that matters? Well, that's this market structure. Okay, so you're a producer in a perfectly competitive market, and you have no control over the price that you can charge. Is there anything you do have control over that you can make decisions about? A perfectly competitive firm may not be able to choose its price, but it can choose how much output to produce. The firm owner will choose the level of output that will maximize his or her profits. See episode 26b to see why. Marginal revenue equals marginal cost will always be the profit maximizing rule. So, you're a firm owner in a perfectly competitive industry. You can't choose the price that you charge, but you can select the amount of output that you produce. In order to maximize profit, you will always choose the level of output where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Take a look at the perfectly competitive firm and see where this occurs. I need to choose output such that marginal revenue equals marginal cost, but right now I don't see marginal revenue or marginal cost. Let's start with marginal revenue. Marginal revenue is the additional revenue that you earn when you sell an additional unit of output. For a perfectly competitive firm, since all units are sold for the same price, each unit sold always adds the same amount of revenue, P star. For example, if price is $5, then the total revenue for 0 units is $0, for 1 unit is $5, for 2 units is $10, and so on. Selling 1 more unit generates $5 additional of revenue each time. Therefore, marginal revenue is equal to the equilibrium price. Note that this is only true for perfect competition. What about marginal cost? Well, marginal cost is actually pretty easy. We constructed the cost curves, marginal cost included, before knowing anything about market structures. Those cost curves are the same regardless of the structure we're operating in. This means that the marginal cost for the perfectly competitive firm is just marginal cost. Remember that J-shaped Nike Swish thing? And now, all we need to do is select the level of output where marginal revenue equals marginal cost. Now, because there are no average cost curves in this diagram yet, I can't actually show you how large or small the profits are, only that Q star will be the best level of output for this particular producer based on the profit maximizing rule. Let's look at just one example of how to find profit using this model, then we'll do more cases in class. What if my perfectly competitive producer is operating in an industry where price is greater than the cost per unit? I can already tell that this producer will be making profits since there's more coming in for each unit than there is being paid out in cost, but let's see what it looks like. Notice that I've positioned the average cost curves below the price line. Where is MR equals MC? This gives me Q star. At Q star, what is the total revenue coming in? Revenue is the price I can charge times the number of units that I sell. In this case, the green area. At Q star, what's the total cost of producing this output? It's the cost per unit, ATC, times the number of units that I sell, in this case, the red area. The amount of revenue, in green, that doesn't get chewed up by the costs, in red, is profit. In this case, I've indicated profit by the blue area. In the short run, this producer earns positive profits. Why do I say in the short run? Because those short-run profits attract the sharks. Other outside firms see the profits and enter the industry to set up shop. This causes industry supply to increase, driving the price downward. In the end, the entry only stops when there are no more profits to attract the sharks, until price is equal to average total cost and the firms just break even. In the long run, a perfectly competitive firm's profits are always equal to 0.
Now moving on to the next topic, we will study the price discrimination. Price discrimination or price differentiation exists when sales of identical goods or services are transacted at different prices from the same provider. In a theoretical market with perfect information, perfect substitutions, and no transaction costs or prohibition on secondary exchange or reselling to prevent arbitrage, price discrimination can only be a feature of monopolistic and oligopolistic markets where market power can be exercised. The effects of price discrimination on social efficiency are unclear. Typically, such behavior leads to low prices for some consumers and higher prices for others. Output can be expanded when price discrimination is very efficient, but output can also decline when discrimination is more effective at extracting surplus from high-valued users than expanding sales to low-valued users. Even if output remains constant, price discrimination can reduce efficiency by misallocating output among consumers.
Okay, how does price get determined in a perfectly competitive market? Know that when we look at the whole market, it's pretty easy. We have supply or marginal cost, demand or marginal benefit, and where they cross, that gives us equilibrium quantity and equilibrium price. But for the perfectly competitive firm, the individual firm, this isn't the case. The way the individual firm gets its price determined in a perfectly competitive market is through the interaction of all the firms in the whole market. The reason this is the case is because in a perfectly competitive market, a firm is not large enough to influence the price of the good. So whether the firm decides to sell more or less, or even if it leaves the market altogether, the price of that good doesn't change because there are so many other firms in the market. So that firm is what's called a price taker. They take the price from the market, and they have no choice whether to charge that price or not. So this is market price. And that ends up being the price that the individual firm has to take. So if they decide to sell where price equals marginal cost, this will be the quantity supplied for that individual firm. What if the firm decides to produce more and sell here? Well, now the price they're selling at is greater than the market price, so nobody will buy their good because they can get an identical good for a cheaper price. If the firm decides to sell here, their price is below the equilibrium price. They're not making enough money to stay in business in terms of economic profit and that sort of thing, so they'll actually have to drop out of the market as well. Even though they'll sell goods at this price and they have a lower marginal cost, the opportunity cost of staying at this point is too high, and they'll either have to increase their price to get back to the market price or they'll drop out of the market. So the key to remember here is that in perfect competition, firms are price takers. And that's because they cannot affect the market price for a good, and their price is determined by this interaction of the whole market. And you can just draw that line straight across to get the price for that individual firm.
Price discrimination requires market segmentation and some means to discourage discount customers from becoming resellers and by extension competitors. This usually entails using one or more means of preventing any resale, keeping the different price groups separate, making price comparisons difficult, and restricting pricing information. The boundary set up by the marketer to keep segments separate is referred to as a rate fence. An example is student discounts at museums. Price discrimination in intellectual property is also enforced by law and by technology. Types of price discrimination. There are three types of price discrimination. First degree price discrimination. In first degree price discrimination, price varies by customers' willingness or ability to pay. This arises from the fact that the value of goods is subjective. A customer with low price elasticity is less deterred by a higher price than a customer with high price elasticity of demand. Second degree price discrimination. In second degree price discrimination, price varies according to quantity sold. Larger quantities are available at a lower unit price. This is particularly widespread in sales to industrial customers where bulk buyers enjoy higher discounts. Third degree price discrimination. In third degree price discrimination, price varies by attributes such as location or by customer segment, or in the most extreme case by the individual customer's identity, where the attribute in question is used as a proxy for ability, willingness to pay. Let's know the determination of market price. Determination of the prices depends internally and external factors. Pricing goals represents internal policy. Also, price policy should be aligned on several other factors. Demand. Demand is the key determinant for market-oriented company. Demand is starting point for all activities. Simply, the average customer will be demanding different product quantities depending on price. Law of the market says that demand and price are counter-proportional. Price increase leads to demand decrease and vice versa. Competition. Competition has a significant influence to price determination of market-oriented companies. Prices need to be adjusted in order to address the competition. Costs. While demand and competition are external factors, the costs are internal. The costs must be embedded in every stage of price determination process. There are several methods of cost embedding into price. Costs plus company calculates the costs and increase price for the specific profit. Markup price based on cost increased for amount of specific markup percentage. Life cycle. Life cycle pricing approach analysis, the current phase of product life in market. Entering phase usually requires higher sales prices in order to pay back initial development costs. Also, customers are willing to pay more for a new product. Growth phase is bringing the market a stabilization. Prices are more or less stable. Saturation phase leads to price decline due to competition, interest and loss of consumers' interest. Declining phase is the last part of product life cycle. Prices are still going down. Sales channel. Sales channels have the different shopping occasion. Consequently, the pricing is adjusted to sales channel. For example, the same products are cheaper in hypermarket than on petrol station. Government. Government is usually doing not interfere into price determination. Exceptionally, it may limit maximal prices for a certain products. Still, government is influencing pricing since the taxes and custom duties are the part of the price. Transfer price. Transfer pricing is the price that is assumed to have been charged by one part of a company for products and services it provides to another part of the same company, in order to calculate each division's profit and loss separately. In today's international market, a large share of world trade consists of transfer of goods, intangibles and services within multinational enterprises, MNEs, associated companies with business establishments in 2 or more countries. To determine the international tax liability in each jurisdiction, the right transfer pricing principle has to be applied. Commercial transactions between different parts of a multinational group may not be subject to the same market forces shaping relations between two independent firms. Transfer pricing payments from one part of a multinational enterprise for goods or services provided by another may diverge from market prices for reasons of marketing or financial policy or to minimize tax. Transfer pricing methods. Best method rule of transfer pricing. The best method rule is intended to avoid the rigidity of the priority of methods that formerly had been required. The rule guides taxpayers and IRS as to which method is most appropriate in a particular case. The temporary regulations no longer provided for an ordering rule to select the method that provides for an arm's length result. Rather, in choosing a method, the arm's length result must be determined under the method which provides the most accurate measures of an arm's length result. Multiple methods of transfer pricing. The temporary regulations encouraged the taxpayer to use more than one transfer pricing method. When 2 or more methods produce inconsistent results, the best method rule should be applied to determine which method produces the most accurate measure. Presumably, if the results are consistent, it may not be necessary to invoke the best method rule. Comparable, uncontrolled price method. The CUP method provides the best evidence of an arm's length price. A cup may arise where the taxpayer or another member of the group sells the particular product in similar quantities and under similar terms to arm's length parties in similar markets and internal comparable. An arm's length party sells the particular product in similar quantities and under similar terms to another arm's length party in similar markets and external comparable. Cost plus method of transfer pricing. The cost plus method begins with the costs incurred by a supplier of a product or service provided to a non-arm's length enterprise, and a comparable gross markup is then added to those costs. Transactional profit. Methods of transfer pricing. Traditional transaction methods are the most reliable means of establishing arm's length prices or allocations. However, the complexity of modern business situations may make it difficult to apply these methods. Where the information available on comparable transactions is not detailed enough to allow for adjustments necessary to achieve comparability in the application of a traditional transaction method, taxpayers may have to consider transactional profit methods. Transactional net margin method TNMM of transfer pricing. The TNMM compares the net profit margin of a taxpayer arising from a non-arm's length transaction with the net profit margins realized by arm's length parties from similar transactions, and examines the net profit margin relative to an appropriate base such as costs, sales or assets. Price war. Price war is a term used in economic sector to indicate a state of intense competitive rivalry accompanied by a multilateral series of price reduction. One competitor will lower its price and then others will lower their prices to match. If one of them reduces their price again, a new round of reductions starts. In the short term, price wars are good for consumers who can take advantage of low prices. Often they are not good for the companies involved. The lower prices reduce profit margins and can threaten their survival. In the medium to long term, they can be good for the dominant firms in the industry. Typically, the smaller, more marginal firms cannot compete and must close. The remaining firms absorb the market share of those that have closed. The real losers then are the marginal firms and their investors. In the long term, the consumer may lose too. With fewer firms in the industry, prices tend to increase, sometimes higher than before the price war started. Causes of price wars. The main reasons that price wars occur are product differentiation. Some products are, or at least are, seen as commodities. Because there is little to choose between brands, price is the main competing factor. Penetration pricing. If a merchant is trying to enter an established market, it may offer lower prices than existing brands. Oligopoly. If the industry structure is oligopolistic, that is, has few competitors, the players will closely monitor each other's prices and be prepared to respond to any price cuts. Process optimization. Merchants may incline to lower prices rather than shut down or reduce output if they wish to maintain the economy of scale. Similarly, new processes may make it cheaper to make the same product. Price stickiness. In an oligopoly market, prices can become sticky because if the price rises, competitors will not follow the rise. So the merchant will lose its market share to its competitors on lower prices. But if the price falls, merchants will follow suit if they can. At some point, merchants find that they cannot gain profit if they cut the price further, so the sticky price remains. Price stickiness is extremely common among large supermarket chains, and prices, especially for commodities, tend not to vary much between them. Many of the supermarkets monitor price changes in other supermarket chains and vary their prices accordingly until they reach the point where any further decrease in their price will affect profits. Now in the end, let us summarize what we have learnt in this lecture. Price is a unique category of the market mix as it is the only component that represents revenue for the firm. These are perfect competition is characterized by a large number of buyers and sellers of an essentially identical product. Price war is a term used in economic sector to indicate a state of intense competitive rivalry accompanied by a multilateral series of price reduction. In the short run, the equilibrium market is determined by the interaction between market demand and market supply. The cost plus method begins with the costs incurred by a supplier of a product or service provided to a non-arm's length enterprise, and a comparable gross markup is then added to those costs.